welcome back to a new video. Today I'm making a fantasy floating castle lightbox. So let's just get right into it. I wasn't sure what project to make this week, so I decided to look through my saved art folder on Instagram. I have this folder where I just save art I liked, and I found this artist called Max's Land Art. He has this really cool style of drawing castles and buildings, and I think his art is really cool, so I decided to draw inspiration from it to create this piece. And if you also find his art cool, check out his Instagram. So I created this sketch of a castle, trying to use some of his design elements, and I created this sketch here. I'm going to have a queen or princess in the foreground, and this ruined floating castle in the background. This project was 14 sheets of cardstock, so I drew a 1/2 inch border around all 14 sheets, and I can get started on the layers. I started in the foreground on the very first layer, which is a framing layer. This layer will have some vines and some broken pillars to frame this lightbox. I try to keep in mind some of these little design elements from Max's Land's artwork, so I try to keep that in mind while I made these pillars. Then I continued and I sketched out a bunch of these layers. I usually don't work like this. I usually do a layer, cut it out, and then continue to the next one. But I kind of was just on a roll and I sketched out all of these layers in advance. I was really inspired by this photo of the castles and this one here. So I kept those design elements in mind, these really pointy buildings and really jagged shapes. And later I'll make sure not to have any straight lines and add more details, but for now I just sketched them out. And at first I was going to make this as a normal project, but then I thought it would be really cool to do some line work because his artwork is very line work heavy and it has a lot of dark, intense line work. So I thought that could be cool and add a unique touch to this lightbox. I have done this before once on a project, this zombie deer project, and I thought that looked really cool. But the project wasn't my favorite, so I thought I could try that again with this cool new style and it could be fun. So I just get this pen that I have, it's just a basic pen from Walmart, and I draw all the line work. And this was so much fun to do. I really enjoyed this a lot. I usually do a lot of cutting and not a lot of drawing, but this time it was reversed and I had so much fun with it. I love art styles that have really heavy line work but really bright colors, so I think this works perfectly for my kind of style. And I decided that it would be better not to cut any lines into it because I thought it could distract from the line work. So this piece will have a ton of dark, heavy line work. I outline all the leaves and the pillars, and I add some shading and details with the pen. For the pillars, I add some cracks and cuts, and I did some speckles and line work to add shading and detail, and I really love how this layer turned out. And then I can move on to the castle. I do lots of heavy dark line work. I make sure none of the walls are straight. I make sure to have lots of really thin spikes, and I just do a lot of shading, a lot of lines and details, trying to make this look old and dark and worn and ruined. I add cracks and destroyed areas, and I think this looks really cool. But it did take quite a lot of time, and this is a lot of cutting and drawing, so while I'm working on this, let me share a story that my sister made for this lightbox. The young queen cowered as she sat on the cold stone of the floor. She sat huddled with her legs close to her body. Feeling safe in this position, she rested her head on her knees and wept, while outside the thick walls of the secret room the battle raged. She could hear a stray scream penetrate the door she had been so carefully hidden behind. The sound caused her to pull her knees closer and fold deeper into herself. The streets of the city outside the queen's secret sanctuary were battered and damaged by war. Several once magnificent structures had been reduced to nothing but charred piles of cinders, which had already started to scatter on the back of the wind while the roofs were caving in under the constant assault of the wild flickering flames. The city drifted amongst the clouds in the moonlight, the orange flames contrasting against the blue moon. The horde of dragons that were responsible for the incendiary attack circled in the sky above like a pack of scary vultures. The armored warriors that sat nestled on their backs were mere pinpricks as the enormous creatures coasted back and forth. Many beautiful buildings which would have stood undamaged for centuries were struck with torrents of fire, sending bricks and walls crumbling down out of the sky. Cracks ran across the otherwise flawless surface of lovely smooth stone walls, like the set of ugly scars, nothing left of the colorful elegant windows of nearby buildings except a few shards of glittery stained glass clinging desperately in their frames. The queen heard a noise and a loud boom shook the castle. Then she heard the collapse of another building. She pictured it now crumbling into the void underneath them. She wondered where it would land on the earth below. Her beautiful kingdom was being reduced to nothing. The story of how this war had started was a bloody tale filled with tragedy. A long time ago, two brothers set off, each with an ambition to found a city. They both succeeded in their dreams, and slowly, bit by bit, their cities became a reality. Since the brothers had always been close, they built their new homes right next to each other so they could see each other often and even help protect each other. As the years passed, the brothers fell in love and eventually got married. The first brother chose well. His bride was not only beautiful, but generous and kind to every single person she met. Unfortunately, the second brother was blinded by a terrible, awful woman and was bewitched by her and married her. She was ruled by jealousy and greed. Her only redeeming quality was that she was extremely gorgeous. Almost instantly, the queen started whispering in her husband's ear, trying to turn him against his brother. At first, he stayed strong and refused to listen to all the venomous tales the queen was telling him about his brother. Unfortunately, after hearing nothing but hate for so long, he caved and started to see his brother like she had, and the relationship grew cold. Things got even worse when his brother's wife gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. The queen had grown jealous of the child because no matter how hard they had tried, she and her husband could not bring a child into the world. To make matters worse, it became obvious, since his earliest days, that the child was incredibly talented and able to perform great feats of magic. Not many men were blessed with magic, though, and it was amongst the pathetic skeletons of this brutalized city that the men fought and died. They laid the way they died, the wicked-looking blades which they had been skewered by stuck out of various parts of their bodies. Some of them had snapped to bits in the heat of the battle and looked like broken, jagged teeth as they jutted out of the chinks of dented armor. Wherever the enemy's weapons struck, blood had flowed forth like a turret. A few brave soldiers kept fighting, releasing deadly blows and slashing desperately at the feet of the attacking dragons. A valiant soldier managed to sever the foot of a swooping dragon with his sword. The massive beast uttered a terrified scream as the scaly appendage flew from its leg and the ragged stump that was left behind gushed blood. In its pain, the creature dumped its rider before it soared away in an agitated manner, involuntarily breathing fire as it went. The dragon rider fell right in front of the soldier's feet. He must have been stunned from the fall because as he landed, he did not move. Then, before he had a chance to, the soldier had rushed and bashed his face in with a chunk of stone that broke off a nearby building. The last remnants of his voice were carried away by the wind, as miserable groans left his throat as he died. When he looked up from his opponent's dead body, he realized he was all alone. Every single one of his comrades had been murdered by the army of dragon riders. In the sky up ahead, the attacks kept coming, a beacon of misplaced hope in the sea of the corpses. The soldier charged at the diving dragons with the blood-stained sword raised above his head. Unfortunately, even though he was strong, he was not strong enough, and he went down, disappearing amongst the bodies of his fallen comrades. The queen shuddered as he heard the painful roar of the dragons outside. Witches and wizards were incredibly rare. The only other known witch lived in a remote hut in the middle of a terrible desert to prevent herself from becoming hunted down for her powers. The luck of having a child with powers born into the kingdom is incredibly lucky and would make the kingdom extremely strong. Threatened by the thought of another kingdom having more power, the queen managed to corrupt her husband all the way, and together they hatched the plan to assassinate the baby's parents and steal him away for themselves. Before they ever executed their plan, the queen traveled to the desert to meet with the witch to see if she could help her with her plan. She ended up selling the queen a potion that when spilled over any being or surface would cause that said being to float. It was under the cover of darkness the following night that the queen snuck into her husband's brother's palace. When she had successfully snuck through the sleeping corridors and entered the happy family's chambers, she was in for a surprise. The woman and the baby were curled up around each other in the middle of a large spacious bed. However, the father was out on a trip and was nowhere to be seen. Hoping that he would not return and ruin her plans, she stabbed the woman and snatched her baby before disappearing into the night. When she returned to the city, she spilled the contents of the bottle the witch had given her onto the largest courtyard. As soon as the first drops of the potion hit the cobblestone, the city started to separate from the ground and float. She could escape with the baby and be the strongest, most powerful kingdom on earth. After the last soldier had fallen, the surviving army moved on, and the ruins of the city were deadly quiet. When the world outside the door was quiet for a while, the queen stirred. As silent as a cat, she cracked the door open and snuck into the hall outside. The walls of the corridor outside the secret room were peppered with holes and stained with blood. As the queen stumbled through the empty halls of the castle, she was hit by how lonely it was. There was nothing left except for the hungry ghosts of the dead. Even though she knew they were not there, she could not help but see them, cowering in warped doorways, grinning at her from windows that had lost their glass and leered from behind the tears that marred the surfaces of the collection of paintings decorating the walls. Big chunks of the roof had caved in, and the weight had become too much for the charred and damaged supports, and she could see the blue sky when she looked up. She slowly and carefully exited the castle. The scene of the battle hit her. She was becoming one of the ghosts, she thought, as she moved through the streets full of the dead, feeling like she was turning translucent, becoming less and less solid, less and less grounded, until she was convinced that she was going to float off into the heart of the city, never to be seen again. It enraged her to lay her eyes on such blood and destruction. For centuries they were mighty, for centuries they were strong, for centuries other nations had bowed at their feet. Why hadn't the spineless cowards fought harder for her? Did they not care about her anymore? She was the queen after all. Why had they not worked harder to protect the city? She thought as she kicked into one of the fallen soldiers. She moved on, walking through the empty courtyards looking for any sign of life. When the king returned home and found his wife murdered and his son missing, he was heartbroken and vowed to rescue his son and avenge his wife. He had no doubt of the fact that his brother and her wife were the ones who committed the crimes. He searched for them tirelessly. Unfortunately, he was not able to find them since their city had disappeared. Burdened with terrible frustration, the brother had the idea to seek the witch. When he arrived at the witch's hut, he found out what had happened to the evil queen's city. Enraged, he asked the witch what he could do. There was no way to reach them up in the sky. She told him there was only one thing that could reach her now, and that was dragons. She sold him a few dragon eggs, and he took them back to his kingdom, raising them. Years and years later, once the dragons had been hatched and trained into monsters, he rallied an army and flew off to rescue his son. A chilly wind blew through the crumbling buildings of the damaged city, and the queen shivered, hoping to find shelter. She walked towards the edge of the cliff and looked down at the world under her. She watched the world move under her, wondering what to do. She couldn't get down. She couldn't go anywhere. She was all alone. She decided to head back to the palace. As she mounted the stairs and started to climb, a feeling of loneliness came over her. She gazed out over the city, hoping to catch some small flicker of movement. In the distance, some of the dragons that had escaped from their riders drifted lazily in the distance, and she reached her hand towards them yearningly, hoping to touch them. However, they were too far to reach and disappeared into the distance. Realizing she was trapped in the sky for the rest of her days, she started to weep. So yeah, that was the story. I really like this one. I think it fits so well. But yeah, let's get back to the project. I finished up these background layers. I kept them simple. I didn't want to overdo it with too much detail since there's so much in the front. I also added a few clouds, again keeping them simple. And I added the moon coming up behind the queen. Then I went back to the front layers and made the queen. I decided to go for a classical medieval queen outfit. I see lots of pictures with these kind of gowns and big headpieces. So I went with that and finished up this front layer. Then it's time to assemble this lightbox. I cut a bunch of foam board strips and layered this lightbox together. I went with this light blue light, almost white, and I think it really fits this night scene. And here's the finished product. I really enjoyed this project. It was so much fun. I'm not the biggest fan of the finished product. I think maybe the castle could have been a little bit further back in the distance, and it looks a little bit weird without any lines cut, but I also kind of like it. So let me know what you think. I like the color. I like a lot about this project, and it was really fun to have a nice change from the usual. So yeah, let me know what you think. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing, and I will see you next time. Bye!